On my first day back in the Oval Office, I will sign a historic slate of executive orders to close our border to illegal aliens and stop the invasion of our country. And on that same day, we will begin the largest deportation operation in American history, larger even than that of President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
When the United States entered World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt worked with Mexico to create the Bracero program, providing legal short-term Mexican labor to American employers like farms and railroad companies. But by the early 50s, American soldiers returning from war were looking for work, and those Mexican workers were vilified for stealing so-called American jobs. In response, President Dwight D. Eisenhower launched America's largest mass deportation in 1954, naming it a racist slur, Operation Wetback. The operation was led by Border Patrol head Harlan B. Carter, who, as a teenager, was found guilty of murdering a 15-year-old Hispanic boy in 1931, although the conviction was later thrown out on a technicality. Carter used military-style tactics to round up Mexicans without any due process, giving them no chance to notify their families. Some were shoved into trucks, dumped in unfamiliar towns across the border. In one instance, 88 deportees died after being left in the desert in 112-degree heat. In Texas, a quarter of those deported were crammed onto boats. A congressional investigation later described one such boat as a, quote, penal hell ship and compared it to a slave ship. Seeing the mass deportations, American farmers, still in need of a cheap workforce, utilized the Bracero program to actually expand legal immigration for these migrant workers. This ultimately led to a decrease in illegal immigration. Nonetheless, the government claimed that over 1.3 million people were deported, and the months-long operation was a, quote, success, saying the so-called wetback problem no longer exists and that the border has been secured. But historians say that the number of people who were actually deported was more like 300,000, a fraction of the 1.3 million that the government claimed, which also included an unknown number of American citizens. This is what Donald Trump is reportedly using as a model for his mass deportation plan. Joining me now is Robert McWhorter, criminal and civil rights lawyer and constitutional law expert. Robert, an important conversation for us to have, especially today. There's new reporting coming out. Trump administration 2.0 preparing the first move of his promised mass deportation campaign with a large-scale immigration raid in Chicago next week, Tuesday. There are currently about 11 million undocumented immigrants in America today, Trump promising to deport between 2 to 3 million of them, in the past claiming that immigrants were, quote, poisoning the blood of our country. Robert, what should immigrants be doing in cities like Chicago to prepare for these mass deportation raids?
Well, I think they should be getting a lawyer. I mean, really, this is getting to be really frightening, absurd. And frankly, the scale of this will far exceed what happened under the Eisenhower administration. Most of us look, it's a historical term, Operation Wetback. Of course, it is a slur. So I'm kind of a little bit, problematic to continue to use that phrase. But this on scale looks like it will be far worse. And frankly, unlike in the 1950s, this has the potential to be a huge expense to the American taxpayer, not only in the cost of doing this, but in the amount of civil damages that are going to occur. I mean, to give you one example, you start deporting American citizens or separating them from their children, that is a multi-million-dollar civil rights lawsuit that the American taxpayers will now have to pay.
Robert, and that may get there, God willing, people being able to find the lawyers who will take on these cases and to battle this in court. But let's start from the ground zero of it. What are the rights for some of these immigrants when they're just stopped by ICE and when these raids are happening?
Well, they do have to respond to ICE questions about their immigration status, but they do have a right to a deportation hearing. They have a right to assert any claims to defenses from deportation. And of course, that would include the right, for instance, to assert that they may be a United States citizen. Even if they're not a citizen, they may have a right to things like cancellation of removal. Technically, the term is removal, not deportation now in most contexts. Or they may have a right to a waiver or political asylum, any number of other rights that they can assert that they have. Now, this also underscores the very problem. There are not enough immigration judges right now to handle the number of cases going through. If you exponentially increase that, there is no procedural way for that to happen other than drastically increase the size of government. And another part of the Trump administration is the promise to cut the size of government. The fact remains that the somewhat, let's say, about 5,000 immigration agents and Border Patrol officers simply physically cannot process 11 to 13 million people in this country. It is absolutely impossible, nor do you have the infrastructure for those deportation hearings to occur. And what you're going to have happen is what happened in Operation Wetback, where you have the potential to have a even much greater humanitarian violation of what's going on this time around.
Robert, white Americans uninterested in the low-paying jobs that would be vacated by these workers, construction workers, hospitality and farm workers, they're doing back-breaking work for low wages and no benefits. My home state of Florida is actually a perfect case study for this. A new law targeting undocumented migrants went into effect in 2023, leading to an actual mass self-evacuation of those that were affected. The Florida Policy Institute estimates this could cost the state $12.6 billion in just 1 year. And that doesn't count the loss of tax revenue. You know, Robert, I find it hard to believe that business owners are supporting Trump's policies if they're resulting in such profound economic loss.
Oh, it's absolutely absurd. In fact, to add to that number, it's estimated that it would cost $69 billion just to try to implement what the Trump administration is claiming to do. Look, I'm going to give you a kind of an interesting little fact. When an undocumented person works, they usually get a fake work authorization. It probably costs $150 at your local swap meet to get one of those. That allows the employer to hire them. The employer takes out all payroll taxes. That includes Social Security taxes, Medicare taxes, to which the worker receives absolutely no benefit. Right now, we're talking 68 to, let's say, $120 billion in unclaimed remittances in the Social Security Trust Fund. Really, if you want to solve the problem of Social Security solvency and Medicare solvency, more illegal immigration and work will actually solve that problem because they put into the system and get nothing out of it. And that's generally what happens with the economic relationships. And what's going to happen when Donald Trump affects any part of this is just going to be exacerbation of that reality.
So what we say in common parlance, Robert, is going to be the find out part. Robert McWhorter, thank you for your advocacy, and I appreciate you being here today. Thanks.